Ahoy! We have news of 3 different kinds today, something related to Transmog, something related to PvP, and then about the raid as well. Let's start with Transmog. So yesterday I showed you the Transmog token purse and how it's no longer going to be obtainable on the new open beta client, so it's likely that we'll no longer be able to get it from any chests. Previously that was the best way to farm it, either elite chests or expedition chests. However, thanks to F, I was made aware of a version of the Transmog token that you can't find directly on New World database, but you can find through nw-buddy.de, their PTR version, and then you go over to this. And here you can actually see that we will be getting some free Transmog tokens in the next season. And that's in the season pass on level 35, level 60, and level 95, and then if you get the premium pass, which is obviously not free, you get another 5 tokens on top of that. That is obviously significantly less tokens compared to what you can make by farming Transmog token purses consistently, because you can get 1 per week, whereas here you get 3 for 3 months pretty much, so 1 per month, assuming the season is 3 months long. That said, it's not necessarily less for everyone, because it depends on what kind of activities you're doing in the game. If you're purely a PvPer, then realistically these tokens are 3 more than you normally would get, because you're not going to do expeditions and you're not going to do chest runs. If you're somewhere in between, or if they maybe had added it to the drop table of the new PvP island, could have looked different, but as a whole, I think for some people this will actually be beneficial, and this will even it out a little bit between different playstyles, that everyone has a chance to get some Transmog tokens. However, that is only for this one season, and that is the very important thing to keep in mind here. This may very well be a little bit of an incentive, a little bit of a taste of Transmog tokens for new players, but then in the following seasons, the season pass may not contain any Transmog tokens at all. If you remember when Transmog tokens first came out, we also had some through Prime Loot, for example, as well as the Season Pass, which hasn't been the case since. So it might just be that for the first Season Pass we're getting this stuff and then they take it out of the Season Pass again. So this may not be a long-term consistent way to get tokens, but only for the next 3 months or whatever the season's going to be. Next, Finny pointed out something interesting regarding the new stagger mechanic. If you weren't aware, the PvP stagger seems to have been changed, or was changed on the open beta version, so that if you get hit by a stagger when your stamina was not full, you were unable to dodge until your stamina was back to full. However, we saw some press footage since then, and in this press footage that actually doesn't seem to be present. Unfortunately, in the open world PvP in the new zone, not a lot of them are using staggers. Most of the builds are a bit janky, I would say. So it was kind of difficult to find spots where this was being used. But there were definitely situations where people dodged and got staggered afterwards, and they didn't get the gray stamina bar. However, I also didn't see anyone dodging afterwards before their stamina was back to full again. Make of that what you will. A lot of players were not playing optimally anyway, so hard to say if this is the case, but it seems like it's possible at least that we won't have this stagger PvP mechanic in the game. That said, we also don't know when this was recorded. It is possible that this may have been recorded before the open beta version of the game, depending on when the journalists test this. But I would assume that it was somewhat recent, just based on the fact that they recorded the raid on the same day. And I think the raid was something that they were working on quite a while towards the end still. So I'm absolutely not sure what this means, if we'll see the stagger mechanic in the final version or not. But I wanted to point this out as something that is noteworthy, because it may change how staggers and stamina behave, or it may not. If you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And if you want to get early trading tips for the upcoming expansion, quote unquote, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Some other news we got today were about the hive of the Gorgons raid, a deep dive on how exactly things will work. First, we can see the final boss here right away in the first screenshot, which is interesting. What they mention here first is that this is the first ever 10-player raid, and that we'll have the hive, in which we have a gauntlet of challenging puzzles and epic boss battles. They also say that when it comes to the endgame content in New World Aeternum, this raid is the pinnacle. It is definitely a step above mutators, and even though it's similar to the Sandworm trial, there are more complex mechanics. Our main goal is to layer together a lot of familiar mechanics while raising the bar for both difficulty and rewards. This is a very interesting statement, and we'll see if it holds true, or if they're also kind of thinking because it's 10 players the difficulty scales differently. But when the Sandworm came out, a lot of people were actually complaining about it being too difficult. Of course, a lot of people were also complaining about it being too easy fairly quickly. But as far as we can tell, there will be no difficulty levels with this raid, at least initially, which would make me wonder if this is actually going to be the most difficult kind of content they have made, because if it is, then a lot of people will be gated out of 725 gear score harder than we would be expecting so far, or at least good pieces, just because a lot of people will not be able to clear this content given how many people weren't able to clear the Sandworm. The fact that you only need 10 people for this definitely helps, but I would assume if this is more difficult than the Sandworm, you would definitely need a solid degree of communication, of coordination, and of general teamwork. People would also have to be geared extremely well, which, especially on Fresh Start, would take quite a while. They do say that they wanted to make sure that the effort is worth it, so they included some of the strongest possible gear in there with 725 gear score, and they added 3 powerful new perks for the Hive of the Gorgons raid. They also didn't want to totally leave crafting out of the loop, they say, so the Hive of the Gorgons raid drops a special crafting material, that's the Gorgon Eye, and that can be used to craft 725 gear score equipment. There's some prep work though, so its vast magical power doesn't overwhelm the materials, plus one more very rare type of crafting item that will remain secret for now. I'm assuming what they're referring to here is what we actually can already find through New World Database, which on one end is we have the Gorgonite with a very rare material being the schematics. These are actually incredibly hard to get, so if you're banking on crafting with a specific one, according to the current data mining, that's going to take a while or going to be very expensive, because these schematics in particular seem to be very hard to get. And with that, you're just crafting a Gorgon's ring at the end, which doesn't actually allow you to select all of the perks as far as it seems so far. You can use your materials here and your Gorgon's Eye, and then you can get a somewhat random craft where I think you can lock 1 perk. Because if you want the item that really locks the full perks, then you have to go to the actual Gorgonite ring that turns into a Gorgonite ring. Again, the recipe names here are just weird, because that's the one that allows you to use 3 craft mods, and that is the one that requires the Gorgon essence as well as a bunch of other resources. So that is effectively what everyone will want, but that's not going to be easy to come by. Especially initially, especially with all the resources you need as well, especially the armor is even more expensive there. And you can see the Gorgon's essence here requires the Gorgon's Eye as well as the Gorgonite Inductor, which is a once a week drop. I think this may also only, it mentions completion here, which makes me think this is only if you really clear the whole raid, which would mean until people actually get the first one of those, it might be a while if the raid is as difficult as they claim it is. And if all of that is the case, then I feel like mentioning crafting here is somewhat pointless, because you're realistically only going to craft that if you are a raider that completes the whole raid and not someone who generally is just interested in crafting. At the same time, I think with how much it seems like you're not easily going to get 725 this way, in a way where you actually get the perks you want, crafting may be somewhat relevant for anyone who's not doing the raid, who's not intensively doing the PvP island anyways. We get some info about the bosses here as well. They say they want to give players responsibilities beyond just hitting the boss to help each other and feel like a team. They also want to add wholly new mechanics that challenge players in ways they haven't experienced before, and moments of real spectacle where they want players to appreciate those unique epic encounters. What we have seen of the raid so far looks pretty good visually, in my opinion, and in terms of different mechanics that people need to pay attention to. They have Echidna, which is the biggest boss to date, with more verticality than any other encounter, which happens through a pillar mechanic that is very important. She'll stomp and thrash around while reshaping the arena, which can be both an opportunity and a hazard. The second boss, Typhon, is the ferocious guardian of a massive elevated bridge. He'll unleash thorny traps for intruders and ravenously devour all who attempt to cross. Maybe talk about the raid in more detail in a separate video in the future. We actually know a lot about the mechanics at this point. The raid's climax against the Brood Mother shows Medusa in her final form, grotesquely mutated, commanding the spread of toxic spores and hatching a horde of her kind spawn. This obviously is the artwork for that. It's interesting that the spores are mentioned here. It may mean that the spore recipe may come into play. I thought they would change it before it gets any use, so we'll see if that's actually going to happen. But yeah, it definitely has that visual design at least. And then we have some more artwork here, what they want to do in terms of design. There will be 3 separate chapters to the raid. This is not meaning they come out at a different time or anything, but rather it's just a section of enemies or puzzle, an action sequence and a boss. So the themes are kind of somewhat separate between the 3. They mention a desert canyon, a Roman bath and an ancient tomb here. A nice feature is that you can now teleport inside the raid, so if you are coming in late you can teleport right to your group. They also mention the internal playtest experts, which apparently have finished the raid at least once, so it seems like it has already been cleared internally. They explain that they don't want to devalue all of the current gear that we have. That's why they're not giving us upgrade version of it that also can go to 725, but rather they might give us new heights to achieve in the future, which to me sounds like they're planning to increase the gear score potentially at a somewhat quicker rate than before, or at least give us the option to catch up to some degree, which is not all that surprising. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you can hear more New World news. And if you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tips for the expansion or New World Aeternum in general in return. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Sloth out.